Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And we'll resume where we left off yesterday in the book, The History of Romanism. The History of Romanism. That is the history of the synagogue of Satan. Okay? The history of the Roman Catholic Church. This is by John Dowling. Highly recommend this book to read for yourself and to share with friends and family. To know who the Antichrist is and how history verifies what Paul preached to the first century church. He who now letteth, who was in control at that very time when Paul spoke, was no one but the Caesars of Rome. The pagan Roman Empire. The very pagan Roman Empire that put Christ to death. And when that power was taken out of the way, then the man of sin would be revealed. And that is, was, and always will be the papacy. We know who the Antichrist is. God's people, God's Bible-believing people have always known who the Antichrist is, even long before the Antichrist came to power. And history has proven, the prophecies regarding Antichrist have proven on every count. There's no reason whatsoever for anyone to be in doubt about who the Antichrist of Scripture, history, and prophecy is. And we, in our generation, are some of the very first generations that ever forgot who the Antichrist is. And why did we forget? Because we were denied this history. That's why we're reading this book. The obvious object in reading this history is to restore the Protestant belief, the first century Christian belief, the infallible belief that Jesus is the Christ, and the papacy is his counterfeit, his antichrist. And this is a no-brainer. This history settles it for everyone who has an objective mind. And that's why we're reading this book. Now, yesterday we related, by the end of the broadcast, that there arose a controversy between King Henry II of England and King Louis VII of France. And they were at loggerheads, and they were ready to go to war. But the Pope intervened as a mediator between these two countries. Remember, the papacy, according to canon law, is the king of kings. Okay? France and England aren't going to be allowed to go to war without the Pope's blessing. And Alexander III, the Pope at that time, intends to mediate a peace between England and France. Okay, so they meet, all three of them meet at the castle of Taissy on the Loire in France. And the two kings, when the Pope approaches on his horse, they dismount from their horses, and they each take their station on either side of the head of the horse of the Pope, each one grabbing one of the reins of the horse, and on either side of the horse lead him into the castle. This was a public display of servitude that at this time of history had never been demonstrated. Okay? England and France, the kings of England and France, literally displayed themselves before the whole world as the servants of the Pope. And Roman Catholic writers are ecstatic in their relation about this particular event. It says one popish writer said, this is Cardinal Baronius, expressed his ecstasies of delight when he said, quote, "A spectacle, this," says he, "to God, to angels, and to men, and such as had never been before exhibited in the world." Okay, such a display of homage and reverence to a pope had never been displayed any time previously in history. Okay? So this was a public demonstration of how the kings of the earth are subservient to the papacy. They guide him into the castle on his horse, both of them carrying one of the reins of the horse. Now, on page 274, subsection 37, we'll continue. It says, the submissive homage of King Henry on this occasion did not prevent Pope Alexander from engaging in a warm dispute, we would call it a heated argument, with the king soon after, which was occasioned by the arrogance of Thomas A. Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury. Okay? At this time, Thomas A. Becket was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was the most powerful primate of the Vatican in England at the time, and there was a continuing controversy between the king, Henry II, and Thomas A. Becket, the Pope's legate, or the Pope's man in Canterbury. And it says in the year 1163, the hostilities commenced between the sovereign, that is King Henry II, and the primate, that means Thomas A. Becket. Now, various instances of the most scandalous impunity of atrocious crimes perpetrated by the clergy, okay, crimes committed by the clergy. Can anybody name a crime that is committed by the Roman Catholic clergy today? I use this example all the time, but there are many, 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 many more. But the pedophile priest pandemic in the world. Every government in the world is responsible to bring those pedophile priests to justice. But they don't. Okay? We're talking about the same sorts of things now. 1,000 years ago, the priests of the Roman Catholic Church, the clergy of the Roman Catholic Church, were guilty of heinous crimes. And the civil power, in this case Henry II, wanted to bring them to justice. Okay? They had broken the civil laws of the land. They were criminals. They were scandalous in their atrocious crimes. You know, it would have to be an embarrassment to the king to suffer such lawlessness among the Roman Catholic priests. So, out of the clamor of the people, the king was pressured, if nothing else, to bring these priests to court and try them for their crimes and imprison them or somehow punish them. Now, he says some of these crimes had reached the king's ears before he returned to England, and he was greatly incensed at them. In other words, the heinousness of these crimes had broached the channel and were talked about on the mainland in Europe. And the king heard about these while he was away on the mainland. It said some of these, the crimes of the priests, had reached the king's ears before he returned to England, and he was greatly incensed at them. You might imagine he was very embarrassed to hear of these crimes while he was among his counterparts in Europe. All right, what kind of country you running, Henry? You know, you allow these priests to do these sorts of things? So Henry's under pressure. Now it says one abominable instance brought the king and Becket, the archbishop, into direct collision on this point. A clergyman, that is one of the Roman Catholic priests in Worcester, had debauched the daughter of a respected man. And for her sake, the priest had her father murdered. Okay? So he had raped a daughter of a very respectable man, and knowing that he would punish her, the priest had her father murdered to spare her the punishment from her father. Okay? For bringing shame upon the family by being a concubine of one of the Roman Catholic priests. All right? It says, a clergyman in Worcester had debauched the daughter of a respectable man, and for her sake, the Roman Catholic priest had the father murdered. It says the king commanded that he should be brought before his tribunal to answer for this horrible act. Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, resisted this and gave him, that is, the priest who debauched the daughter, who gave him into the custody of the bishop. Now, as I said before, I'll say again, this is another example proving that the most powerful man in any location in this world is the local Roman Catholic bishop. Okay? So Thomas Becket, the archbishop, takes this accused priest and hands him over to the bishop for protection from the king. Becket resisted this and gave him into the custody of the bishop that he might not be delivered to the king's justice. Okay, now Roman Catholic canon law stipulates that the civil power is a lesser power than the papacy. That the civil powers, the governments, the kings of the earth, are the sons, while as the Catholic popes and the Catholic bishops and the Catholic priests are the fathers. Okay, that's why they call them father. That's why they're supposed to call them father. So that it is inherently, every time they open their mouth and call the priest or a bishop a father, they're acknowledging their superiority status over the civil power. That's why you'll see the current president of the United States offering his description of his priest advisors as father, okay, or your eminence. He's acknowledging his inferior rank to his Roman Catholic priestly advisors. So you see in front of your face, no one ever describes it to you in this context, but you see on the television every night when there's ever any interaction, public interaction between the President of the United States and these Roman Catholic priests and bishops and our cardinals and archbishops, he calls them either Father or Your Eminence. That's a public acknowledgement that he reveres them as his father, and he their son. All right, the king, who had seen repeated instances of clergy permitting their offending brethren to escape with impunity, and as their crimes, instead of being repressed, became daily more flagrant, was the more intent upon accomplishing his important object. He's going to bring this debauching priest to justice. The priests aren't going to be allowed to get by with all these atrocious crimes. Now, you would think the President of the United States would round up all the pedophile priests at this time, put them on trial, and put them in jail. Okay? That's the like situation that we would see today if justice were carried out by the civil powers. But President, what's-his-face, doesn't matter who he is, they all kiss the ring of the Pope. He won't round them up. He calls the priests who advise him Holy Father or Your Eminence. Okay? The President of the United States knows that it is a tragic risk to his own life, if not his office, to publicly denounce the pedophile priests in this country. And how does he know to keep his mouth shut about these things? He's got all of history to attest. Here we have the example of an English king, Henry II, who wants to bring these debauchee priests to justice. And here's the history that relates why the current President of the United States won't take a similar stand against the debauchee priests of our generation. He says, Becket resisted this and gave him into the custody of the bishop that he might not be delivered to the king's justice. The king, who had seen repeated instances of the clergy permitting their offending brethren to escape with impunity, and as their crimes, instead of being repressed, became daily more flagrant, was the more intent upon accomplishing his important object. he justly imputed these atrocities to the exemption of the clergy from trial before the secular courts. Okay? This is a direct reference to Roman Catholic canon law, which forbids the civil power to bring into court any of the fathers of the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? The civil power has no jurisdiction over the Pope's priests. As a matter of fact, the local law enforcement officers in your community, if they were ever to broach the threshold of a Roman Catholic church to apprehend a Roman Catholic pedophile priest, they would be found in contempt of the papal courts. All right? No civil power has any jurisdiction in a Roman Catholic church or any of its precincts. Every Roman Catholic church is an asylum for pedophile priests. That's where they can go to get out of jail free. If they can make it to the church or any of the precincts of the Pope, they are off limits. The police can't follow them in. And if one, not knowing this historical tradition, does follow a priest into the church, it's quietly suppressed. The information is quietly suppressed, and in private conversation between the bishop and the local chief of police, the local chief of police is chastised for allowing one of his law enforcement officers to follow a priest into the church. Okay, it's a false arrest. There's no jurisdiction, no grounds, and the bishop orders the chief of police to lay off. Okay? The local bishop is the boss of your local police chief. Whatever the bishop says, that's what the police chief does. The most powerful man in every locality is the Roman Catholic bishop. All right? Now, the king justly imputed these atrocious crimes to the exemption of the clergy from trial before the secular courts, while the ecclesiastical tribunals, that is, the Pope's courts, to whom they are in which they are tried, to whom they are subject, had no power to inflict capital punishment or indeed any adequate punishment. So the civil courts have no jurisdiction over this debauchee priest. And the ecclesiastical tribunals, the court system set up by the Pope, has no means to punish one of these priests. Okay? That's Roman Catholic canon law. So if you understand what I'm telling you, every Roman Catholic priest has a license to commit crime. Okay? There's no court that can bring them to justice. In the Roman Catholic canon law, it's equivalent in attempting to try a priest is the same as trying the Pope. They are his agents, they are his extension, his right arm, and if anyone, either a civil court or an ecclesiastical tribunal, renders a sentence of guilt and imprisonment of one of the Roman Catholic Church's priests, it's as if they had tried and convicted the Pope himself. All right? So they're lawless. The sons of lawlessness. That's what Roman Catholic priests are. There's no jurisdiction over them. They can commit their crimes with impunity. And that's what was taking place in England at this time, and that's what's taking place in the world at our time. Nobody has jurisdiction over the Roman Catholic priests but the popes themselves. And that's why this lawlessness continues. And that's why the civil powers have no jurisdiction. Not even the world court has jurisdiction over the chief pedophile at the time when charges were brought. Pope Benedict XVI, the world court refused to try him. They said, we don't have any jurisdiction over him. Okay, that's why they made him Pope, so that no one could bring him to justice. All right? All right, he justly or rightly imputed these atrocities to the exemption of the Roman Catholic clergy from trial before the secular courts, while the ecclesiastical tribunals, the church courts to whom they were subject, had no power to inflict capital punishment or indeed any adequate punishment. Okay? So the crimes continue. And you can mark it down in any time in history when the Roman Catholic Church excelled in power, it also excelled in criminality. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's a fact of history. Been repeated over and over and over. And you can judge the power of the Roman Catholic Church by the extent of its criminality. Whenever it becomes the more powerful in the world, it becomes the more sinful and criminal. And at what time in history have there been a global protest against the pedophile priests of Rome? You must conclude on that basis that the papacy is more powerful than it's ever been in its history. That civil courts nor ecclesiastical courts, nor the cry and hue of all the nations of the world can bring these priests to justice. That's the extent to which Rome's power excels today in our generation. He says, with a view to redress this crying evil, King Henry summoned a great council at Westminster, which he opened with an excellent speech in which he complained of the mischiefs occasioned by the thefts, the robberies, and even murders committed by the clergy, who were suffered to go unpunished. And he concluded with requiring that, quote, he concluded with requiring that the archbishop and the other bishops would consent that when a clergyman was degraded for any crime, he should be immediately delivered up to the civil power, that he might be punished for the crime according to the laws of the land. Okay? That's a key clause. According to the laws of the land. Not the laws of Roman Catholic canon law. The laws of the land. So, you can tell, at least from this, that the king is not going to regard Roman Catholic canon law. He's going to apply civil law to the Roman Catholic priests. In other words, he's going to reduce them from their high status as the creator of their creators, the fathers, reduce them to the same status as a street sweeper in England. You think the Pope's going to put up with that? No. It says Becket at first, that is Thomas A. Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, the one who was protecting this priest, Becket at first refused to comply with this reasonable demand. But in the following year he solemnly swore to obey the constitutions of Clarendon, by which all clergymen guilty of criminal offenses were rendered amenable to the civil law. Okay, we've set the stage. Becket at first refused to turn over this priest, and then swears to abide by the constitutions of Clarendon, whereby he must surrender this priest to the civil power. But it's not over. All right, now back to the truth. Thomas A. Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, at first refused to hand over this debauchee priest and this murderous priest. Remember, he debauched a virgin, and then he killed her father so that he wouldn't punish her. The rumors of this murderous act reached the ears of the king on the mainland of Europe while he was out of the country. And so King Henry II returned to England and demanded that that priest be turned over to the civil power to be tried, convicted, and imprisoned. But Thomas A. Becket, the Archbishop of the Pope in Canterbury, gathered up this priest and put him in the hands of his bishop, isolating him from the civil power. See, the civil power has no jurisdiction to cross the threshold of any Roman Catholic Church, and especially not that of the bishop, the most powerful man in any jurisdiction. So the bishop became an asylum for this convict. And Thomas A. Becket refuses to hand him over. The Pope's men are going to protect this diabolical priest. And the king is at loggerheads with them. He demands this criminal be released into the custody of the state to be tried. Now, Becket refuses at first, but then changes his mind and agrees to obey the constitutions of Clarendon. Now, I've not looked up and researched the constitutions of Clarendon, but on its face it appears that the constitutions of Clarendon were an act of the civil law, the king, demanding jurisdiction over the priesthood. This is a direct violation of Roman Catholic canon law. The Pope would regard the constitutions of Clarendon as the laws of man, and Roman Catholic canon law is the law of God. Roman Catholic canon law demands that the priests be subject only to the Pope. The constitutions of Clarendon demand that these priests be subject to the civil power, the laws of the land, where anyone who debauches a virgin and then kills her father is guilty of rape and murder, and to be justly tried, convicted, and punished under the laws of the land. Becket refuses and then eventually obeys the Constitution of Clarendon and has this priest arrested, or at least opens the opportunity for this priest to be arrested. All right, now he's caught between a rock and a hard place. He's caught between the Pope and the king. How does this saga end? It says, as it was with manifest reluctance that Becket had sworn to obey those hated constitutions. Why were they hated? Because they were contrary to Roman Catholic canon law. That's why they hated them. They rendered the constitutions of Clarendon, rendered the Roman Catholic canon law null and void in England. If the constitutions of Clarendon made the priests of the Roman Catholic Church subject to the civil power, then the constitutions of Clarendon made Roman Catholic canon law of no effect, and essentially tips the Pope off of his throne. It's a power struggle. It's a power struggle that had raged for over 1,000 years in every country. Who has supremacy, the Pope or the King? And over and over and over, as we've read this book, the Pope has the power. The King is just a vassal of the Pope. But Henry II has persuaded Becket to comply with the councils of Clarendon. Becket now finds himself doing violence against the Pope who put him in his seat. Now it says it was with manifest reluctance that Becket had sworn to obey those hated constitutions. So he soon began to give indications of his repentance by extraordinary acts of mortification. Now what's a typical example of these extraordinary acts of mortification? Well, he might have sat out in front of his archbishopric in sackcloth and ashes, okay? Or he might have stripped himself down to his skivvies and walked up and down the streets publicly whipping himself until his back was bloody, demonstrating his repentance of having agreed to abide by the constitutions of Clarendon and tipping over the throne of the Pope and spitting in the face of Roman Catholic canon law. Look, to a Roman Catholic priest who finds himself in this situation, he finds himself in violation of mortal sin. That means that if he doesn't repent and amend his ways with the Pope, he'll be eternally damned. Not only removed from his office, not only stripped of his power, not only stripped of his ecclesiastical office, but he'll be eternally damned. That's Roman Catholic canon law. He will be excommunicated and turned over to the civil power for punishment. That's what Roman Catholic canon law says. Now, Becket's caving under the pressure. He's reneged on his agreement to obey by the constitutions of Clarendon. He's now mortifying himself, killing himself publicly. Extraordinary acts of mortification. That's what it means. And by refraining from performing his sacred offices of his function. Okay? So he was mortifying himself, and he was also refusing to perform the functions of his archbishopric. He said he dispatched a special messenger to the Pope, apprising the Pope of what he had done. The latter, that is the Pope, sent him a bull. This is a writing, a most powerful writing of the Pope. A bull, a papal bull, is irrescindible. It cannot be annulled, either by the Pope or anyone else. It is as if it were the voice of God itself, the bull, the papal bull, which released Becket from the obligation of his oath. Okay? Remember, in Roman Catholic canon law, the prelates of the Roman Catholic Church are forbidden on pain of excommunication for pledging allegiance to the civil power, swearing allegiance and fealty to the civil power. So Becket, at some point, did pledge allegiance to obey the king. Now, there is a papal bull which is complicit with Roman Catholic canon law, which says the priest shall not swear allegiance to the king. And so this bull releases Becket from his oath. The Pope can annul any swearing of a bishop. Anyone who swears allegiance to the civil power can be released of his obligation to abide by that oath. And this is the case. The Pope wrote his most powerful official writing called a bull, releasing Becket from the obligations of his oath, and enjoined him, that is, forced him to resume his duties of his sacred office. Okay? So just by the stroke of a pen, the Pope can alleviate the conscience of Becket, reverse his oath, and demand him to return to his sacred office as the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, where does the argument reside? Between the king and the Pope, right? Becket's been exonerated by the Pope. He says, but though this bull reconciled Becket's conscience to the violation of his oath, it did not dispel his fears of the king's indignation, to avoid which he determined to retire privately out of the kingdom. In other words, he might have had his conscience eased by this papal bull, releasing him from his obligation to obey the king, but that's not going to stop the king. And Becket knows it. And so he's going to beat feet out of England. And it says, with this intention, he went down to Romney. I would take that to be the southern end of the island. And he, accompanied by two of his friends, and there they embarked for France. Okay, so he set sail to leave the country with two of his friends. but being twice put back by the contrary winds. Who controls the winds? God does, doesn't he? It says, but being twice put back by contrary winds, Becket landed and returned to Canterbury. So he wasn't allowed to leave England. The winds blew, and the ship continually returned to shore. The winds just blew the boat right back to shore. Every time they launched, the wind just blew the boat right back to shore. So Becket's stuck in England. So he goes back to Canterbury. And it says, about the same time, the king's officers came to that city, Canterbury, with orders to seize Becket's possessions and his revenues, but on Becket showing himself that he was still in Canterbury, they, that is, the king's officers, retired without executing their orders. Conscious that he had transgressed those laws which he had sworn to observe, there's your false oath. He swore to observe the constitutions of Clarendon. By attempting to leave the kingdom without permission, he waited upon the king at Woodstock, who received him without any other expression of displeasure other than merely asking him the question if he had left England because he thought it too little to contain both of them. Okay? So the king is rather mild in his response, isn't he? You attempted to leave England because you thought possibly England was too small to contain both of us? Let me tell you something. Surely you must realize that the Archbishop of Canterbury is much too big for his britches, because the Pope's much too big for his britches. You see, the Pope has no power in the world. He does not get his power from God. He gets his power from Satan. Okay? And Satan is already a defeated foe. Christ has died and redeemed the souls of all who give their lives to him. The Bible says the earth is mine and the fullness thereof. There's nothing in existence that is not owned by Christ who created it. And we are joint heirs with him. And the popes, all of them, in succession, from the first to the last, and all their diabolical claims are nothing but hot air. Okay? And the king, in this case, Henry II, if he doesn't serve Christ and him only, he's no king. Now here's the king faced with the emissary of the Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Both of them are no greater than a fart in a skillet. You understand my meaning? Neither one of them are worth the fart in a skillet. Sometimes you have to resort to colorful language to describe the truth. And they're faced off with one another, wondering if England was just too small for the both of them. Well, let me tell you something. Not before too long, this whole earth will be bereft of both of them. There'll be but one king, King Jesus, and the world will be his subject. Okay? And we will be joint heirs with him. He will assume the inheritance that his father gave him. And we will be joint heirs with him. There'll be no king, there'll be no archbishop to contend with. So what are they really? Nothing but hot air. Hot air. Shall we sweat over hot air? Now, subsection 38. I hope I've made my point. I hope you're not offended by my choice of language. I hope you understand the appropriateness of this description. The whole world has gone astray. The kings of the earth do not serve Christ, they serve the Antichrist. What loyalty, fealty, or allegiance do we have to either of them? If Christ be your king, who is the King of England? Who is the Archbishop of Canterbury? Just so much hot air. Subsection 38. Soon after this interview, fresh misunderstandings arose between the king and the primate, that is, King Henry II and Archbishop of Canterbury Becket, who publicly protected the clergy from those punishments which their crimes deserved and flatly refused to obey a summons to attend the king's court. Okay? So, Becket has been relieved of his oath. He's renounced the Constitution of Clarendon, and he's reasserted Roman Catholic canon law. And now he's defending these debauchee and murderous priests and preventing them from being taken to the king's court for justice. And it says King Henry was as much enraged at these daring insults on the laws and the royal authority that he determined to call him to account before his peers in a parliament which he summoned to meet at Northampton on the 17th of October 1164 A.D. This parliament was unusually full, the whole nation being now deeply interested in the issue of this contest between the crown, that's King Henry II, and the mitre, that is the Pope, okay? That in the person of the Archbishop Thomas A. Becket. And it says, on the first day, the king in person accused the Archbishop of Canterbury of contumacy in refusing to attend his court when he was summoned, against which accusation, having been made only a very weak defense, he was unanimously found guilty by the bishops as well as by the temporal barons, and all his goods and chattels were declared to be forfeited. Okay? So now everybody is against Thomas A. Becket. The priests, the barons, and the king. Becket is opposed by the whole country. And this contest has the national press's attention. Everyone knows about it, except one thing. Becket's in possession of the bull that relieves him of any oath that he's ever taken to the king, or the country, or the laws of the land. Now, he says many of the bishops waited upon Becket. In other words, they milled around him all the time, attending him constantly. Many of the bishops waited upon Becket and earnestly entreated him to resign his office, assuring him that if he did not, he would be tried for perjury and high treason. Okay? The question is asked, how can Becket be tried by the civil power for perjury and high treason when the Pope has alleviated him of his oath? Becket knows this, no one else does. And it says, Becket, however, was made of sterner stuff. He reproached them, the bishops, bitterly for deserting him in his contest, charged them not to presume to sit in judgment upon their primate, and declared that though he should be burnt alive, he would not abandon his station nor forsake his flock. Okay? You've got to know, Becket has no allies in England at this time. All of his brother fathers, all the priests, have sided with the king. And they're begging him to resign his office. Because this contest between the Pope and the king is going to get real ugly. And everybody stands to be tried in the king's court. Everybody. And Becket's the only holdout left. The king wants his hide. The barons want his hide. and the bishops want him out of the country. Becket doesn't have any allies. You know, anybody made of mortal stuff would have crumbled at this point. Not Becket, not Thomas A. Becket. It says, having celebrated Mass, he set out from his residence dressed in his pontifical robes with a consecrated host in his hand. Now, you know what the consecrated host is? That's the little piece of bread that they hold up and say, Hoc est corpus meum, and it becomes the literal blood, body, soul, and divinity of Christ. The whole Christ, nothing lacking. So he's got Jesus in his hand. The creator of his creator has his creator in his hand. You know, and if you're a papist, if you're a Roman Catholic, that speaks power. You got Jesus in your hand. And when he approached the hall where the king and the parliament sat, he took the cross from the bearer and carried it in the other hand. So he's got Jesus in one hand and the cross in the other. And that ought to be enough to make any Roman Catholic quake in his boots, right? And it says, when the king was informed of the posture in which Becket was advancing, he retired hastily into an inner room, commanding all the bishops and the barons to follow him. This is an emergency situation. We're going to see how it ends on the broadcast Monday. Don't miss it. It's very entertaining. I'll be back. Pray for me.